I exposed Mom's affair, proved my brother wasn't Dad's. They locked me in a psych ward and drugged me into silence for months. 11 years later, Dad found out I was right and begged forgiveness. I told him to rot. 3 weeks ago, my father sat across from me at a diner off the interstate and cried into his hands. He was 61 years old. He looked 75. His hair was gone. His skin hung off his face like it had given up trying. He slid a folded DNA report across the table and said, "You were right. About everything. I'm so sorry." I looked at him. I looked at the paper. I looked at the man who signed the forms that put me in a psychiatric facility when I was 15 years old because I told the truth about my mother. And I said, "You let them drug me. You let them lock me in a room for 4 months. You looked me in the face and told me I was sick. You chose her. You chose the lie. And now you want me to make you feel better about it?" He said, "Please," I said, "rot." I stood up. I left the diner. I drove home. I haven't spoken to him since. I don't plan to. And if that makes me the villain of his redemption story, then good. He can add it to the list of things he got wrong about me. Let me take you back. All the way back. Because this didn't start in a diner 3 weeks ago. It started in a house in rural Pennsylvania, in 2015, when I was 15 years old and stupid enough to believe that telling the truth would be enough to save my family. My name is Callie. I grew up in a small town where everybody knew everybody and nobody knew anything real. My father, Ray, was a long-haul trucker. Gone 3, 4, sometimes 5 days a week. My mother, Sharon, was a stay-at-home mom who volunteered at the church and ran the PTA bake sale every spring and smiled so wide at community events that you'd think she was running for office. She was the kind of woman that other women called a saint because she raised 2 kids alone most of the week while her husband was on the road. What those women didn't know is that Sharon wasn't alone. She hadn't been alone for years. I have a brother. His name is Eli. He's 4 years younger than me. When I was 15, Eli was 11. And even at 15, even before I had the words for it or the evidence to prove it, I knew something was off about Eli. Not about Eli himself. He was a sweet kid. Quiet. Bookish. The kind of boy who built Lego sets in silence for hours and didn't like loud noises. But he didn't look like us. Not like me. Not like my father. I have my dad's jaw, his dark hair, his deep-set brown eyes. Eli had light hair, blue eyes, a narrow face, and a build that didn't match anyone on either side of our family. People commented on it casually, the way people do. "Oh, Eli must take after someone way back in the family tree." My mother would laugh and say, "He's the milkman's baby," and everyone would laugh because it was a joke. It was always a joke. Until it wasn't. The man's name was Glenn. I didn't know his name at first. I just knew his truck. A blue Ford F-150 with a dented rear bumper and a fishing sticker on the back window. I started noticing it parked on our street when my father was on the road. Not every time. But often enough that it registered. Once a week. Sometimes twice. Always during school hours or late in the evening. I was 15 and observant in the way that kids become observant when their home feels unstable and they can't figure out why. I didn't have a framework to call it what it was. I just knew that a blue truck kept showing up when my dad was gone, and my mother's mood was different on those days. Lighter. More distracted. She'd hum while cooking dinner. She'd check her phone and smile at something and then put it face down on the counter when she caught me watching. I saw Glenn for the first time on a Thursday afternoon. I'd come home early from school because I felt sick. The guidance counselor had called my mother, but she didn't answer, so they let me walk home because it was a small town and that was still something you could do. I came through the back door. The kitchen was empty. I heard the TV in the living room. I walked in and there was a man on our couch. He was leaning forward, tying his boots. My mother was standing by the hallway entrance, arms crossed, face flushed. They both looked at me like I'd walked into a room I wasn't supposed to see. Which I had. My mother recovered first. She said, "Callie, this is Glenn. He's from church. He was helping me move some boxes in the garage." Glenn stood up, smiled at me, said, "Hey there," and walked out the front door. I watched him leave. I watched him get into a blue Ford F-150 with a dented rear bumper. And I watched my mother watch him drive away with an expression on her face that I'd never seen directed at my father. Not once. Not ever. I didn't say anything that day. I was 15. I was scared. I was nauseated, both from the stomach bug and from the thing I'd just seen that I couldn't unsee. But something started building in me after that. A slow, sick awareness that my mother was lying. Not just about Glenn. About everything. About the phone calls she'd taken in the other room. About the errands she ran on Saturday mornings. About the reason she always seemed happier when my dad was gone and tighter when he was home. I started watching. Not with cameras or technology. Just with my eyes. And what I saw, over the next 3 months, was a pattern so obvious that I couldn't believe my father hadn't seen it himself. But he was on the road. He wasn't home to see the blue truck. He wasn't home to see the smile. He wasn't home for any of it. And my mother had been counting on that for years. The moment I connected Glenn to Eli happened in October. I was scrolling through my mother's Facebook on the family computer. She'd left herself logged in. I wasn't snooping with intent. I was bored. But when I clicked on her messages, I found a thread with a man named Glenn Hartley. And the things in that thread made the room tilt. Pet names. Plans to meet. References to our situation and being careful. And one message, from Glenn to my mother, that I have never been able to erase from my memory. It said, I saw Eli's school photo. He looks more like me every year. That scares me sometimes. My mother's reply, don't worry. Ray doesn't see it. He never will. I stared at that message until the screen went blurry. Then I screenshot it. I screenshot the entire conversation. I saved it to a flash drive. And I sat in my room that night holding that flash drive like it was a live grenade, because I knew, with the certainty of a 15-year-old who has just had her entire world rewritten in a single sentence, that my little brother was not my father's son. And my mother had known the entire time. And she had built our family on a lie so massive that it had its own architecture, its own language, its own rules. And I was the only one who could see it. I told my father on a Sunday night in November. He'd been home for 2 days. He was tired. He was sitting in his recliner watching football. Eli was in bed. My mother was in the bath. I walked into the living room with the flash drive in my pocket and my hands shaking so badly I could hear my own pulse. I said, Dad, I need to tell you something. He muted the TV. He looked at me. And I told him everything. Glenn. The truck. The messages. The line about Eli. I handed him the flash drive. I said, it's all on there. Everything. I expected anger. I expected pain. I expected him to storm upstairs and confront my mother. I expected the world to crack open and the truth to come flooding out. What I got was silence. A long, terrible silence. And then my father looked at me and said something that I will hear in my nightmares until the day I die. He said, Callie, why are you making things up? I said, I'm not making it up. It's on the drive. Read the messages. He said, your mother would never do that. I said, she did. She is. Glenn Hartley, Dad. Look it up, he said, and his voice got harder. You've been having problems at school. Your grades are slipping. Your mother told me you've been acting out. I said, that has nothing to do with this. He said, I think it has everything to do with this. I think you're angry and you're confused and you're making up stories to get attention. He turned the TV volume back up. He tossed the flash drive on the coffee table like it was junk mail. He didn't look at me again. I went to my room. I sat on my bed. And something inside me rearranged. Not broke. Rearranged. Like a bone that heals crooked. I realized, in that moment, that my father didn't refuse to believe me because the evidence was weak. He refused because believing me would mean dismantling everything he built his life on. His wife. His family. His identity as a man who had it together. Believing me would mean that the woman he trusted had been sleeping with another man for years and that the son he'd raised might not be his. That's not something a man sitting in a recliner on a Sunday night is equipped to process. So he didn't process it. He rejected it. And he rejected me with it. But it got worse. Because I didn't stop. I brought it up again 3 days later. And again the following week. I printed the screenshots. I left them on the kitchen table. My mother found them. And that's when the atmosphere in that house turned from denial into something much darker. My mother came to my room that night. She closed the door. She sat on the edge of my bed. And her face was a mask I'd never seen before. Calm. Terrifying. She said, I don't know what you think you saw, but you need to stop this. Right now. You're hurting your father. You're hurting this family. And if you keep going, there are going to be consequences. I said, I saw the messages, Mom. I know about Glenn. I know about Eli, she said, you don't know anything. You're a child. You're confused. And if you keep spreading these lies, I will have you evaluated. I didn't know what evaluated meant at 15. Not really. I thought she meant grounded. Maybe therapy. I didn't know that evaluated was the first step in a process that would end with me locked in a room with a plastic mattress, a paper gown, and a nurse who handed me pills every morning and watched me swallow. 2 weeks later, my parents took me to see a psychiatrist. Not a therapist. A psychiatrist. A man named Dr. Pruitt who had an office that smelled like carpet cleaner and who asked me questions for 45 minutes while my mother sat in the waiting room feeding him the narrative she'd already constructed. The narrative was this: Callie is unstable. Callie has been making delusional accusations about family members. Callie is a risk to herself and others. Callie is exhibiting paranoid ideation. I sat in that office and I tried to explain. I said, I'm not delusional. I have screenshots. I have evidence. My mother is having an affair and my brother isn't my dad's. Dr. Pruitt nodded the way doctors nod when they've already decided. He said, Callie, sometimes when we're under stress, our minds create narratives to explain things we can't control. I said, I'm not creating a narrative. I'm reading text messages. He said, we're going to get you some help. The help was a 72-hour involuntary hold at a residential psychiatric facility 40 minutes from my hometown. My mother drove me there. My father signed the admission forms. I begged them not to do it. I said, I'm not crazy. Just read the flash drive. My father said, this is for your own good. My mother said nothing. She didn't even look at me. She signed her section of the paperwork, kissed me on the forehead, and walked out the door. I stood in the intake room of that facility, 15 years old, holding a bag with 3 changes of clothes, and I understood for the first time that the truth was not going to save me. The truth was the reason I was here. I told the truth, and my family's response was to lock me in a building and call me insane. The 72 hours became 2 weeks. The 2 weeks became a month. The month became 4 months. Every time a review hearing came up, my mother provided updated concerns. My father co-signed. Dr. Pruitt, who was now consulting with the facility's in-house team, recommended continued stabilization. They put me on medication. Antipsychotics. For a 15-year-old girl whose only symptom was knowing the truth. I gained weight. I slept 14 hours a day. My thoughts became thick and slow, like wading through mud. I stopped talking about the affair. Not because I believed I was wrong. Because I learned that every time I mentioned it, they extended my stay. The silence was the only way out. So I went silent. I stopped fighting. I took the pills. I attended the group sessions. I nodded when they asked if I understood that my delusions were a symptom of stress. I performed recovery. I performed sanity. I performed the lie that my mother needed me to perform in order to keep her secret alive. 4 months. I was inside that facility for 4 months. I missed half of sophomore year. I missed Christmas. I missed Eli's birthday. I came out weighing 30 pounds more than when I went in, with a medical record that said psychotic features and delusional disorder, and a family that treated me like a fragile object that might break again at any moment. My mother hugged me at pickup and said, I'm so glad you're better. I looked at her. I said nothing. Because I understood, at 15, something that most people don't learn until much later: some families don't want the truth. They want the version. And if you threaten the version, they will destroy you to protect it. I spent the next 6 years surviving. That's the only word for it. I finished high school barely. I didn't go to college. I couldn't. My psychiatric record followed me. My transcript had a 4-month gap. My confidence was shattered. The medication had dulled something in me that I've never fully gotten back. I moved out at 18. I worked retail. I worked food service. I lived in apartments with roommates who didn't know my history. I built a life that was small and quiet and 1,000 miles from that house, that facility, and the people who put me there. I stopped speaking to my mother completely at 19. I stopped speaking to my father at 20. I sent Eli a birthday card every year, but he never responded. I don't blame him. He was a kid when I was sent away, and whatever story my parents told him, he believed it. To Eli, I was his crazy older sister who had a breakdown and had to be hospitalized. He didn't know he was the reason. He didn't know that his DNA was the secret our mother was willing to destroy her own daughter to protect. I built a life. I need you to know that first, before the rest of this unfolds, because people hear psych ward at 15 and they assume the story ends in a gutter. It didn't. It almost did. There were years where I didn't want to be alive, years where the medication fog and the shame and the isolation pressed down on me so hard I couldn't see daylight. But I kept moving. Not because I was brave. Because I was angry. And anger, when it's the right kind, the kind that says I will not let them be right about me, is the most effective fuel there is. I got off the medication at 19. Weaned myself off with the help of a free clinic doctor who actually listened to me, a woman named Dr. Pham who looked at my chart and said, who diagnosed a 15-year-old with delusional disorder based on a family report. I said, a man named Pruitt who took my mother's word over mine. She said, I'd like to reevaluate you. She spent 3 sessions with me. Full assessment. Cognitive testing. Emotional baseline. At the end, she looked at me and said, "Callie, you are not psychotic. You are not delusional. You are a traumatized young woman who was punished for telling the truth." I sat in her office and I cried for 20 minutes straight. Not because it was news. Because it was the first time in 4 years that a medical professional had said it out loud. I wasn't crazy. I was right. And being right had cost me everything. I got my GED at 20. I started community college at 21. I studied social work because I wanted to understand what had been done to me and make sure it couldn't be done to someone else. I worked full-time through school. I lived alone. I didn't date. I didn't have close friends. I had a therapist, the real kind, not the kind my mother selected, and I had Dr. Pham, and I had myself. That was enough. Some semesters it wasn't enough, and I'd sit in my car in the campus parking lot and grip the steering wheel and breathe until the panic passed. But I finished. I graduated at 24. I got a job at a county child services agency. I was good at it. I was good at it because I knew what it looked like when a family closed ranks around a lie and sacrificed a child to keep it alive. I could spot it in intake interviews the way a surgeon can spot internal bleeding. Something in the child's eyes. The flatness. The compliance that isn't peace but survival. I saw myself in those kids. And I fought for them in ways that nobody had fought for me. Now let me tell you how the truth came out. Eli turned 22 last year. He was living on his own, working as a pharmacy tech, and by all accounts living a normal, quiet life. He'd grown up believing the family story, that I was mentally ill, that I'd had a psychotic episode at 15, and that my delusions about our mother were symptoms of a sick mind. He had no reason to question it. Until his girlfriend suggested they do one of those consumer DNA ancestry tests. The kind you spit in a tube and mail off and get results in 3 weeks. Fun. Casual. Something millions of people do without a second thought. Eli did it. The results came back, and Eli's world ended in a single email notification. The test showed that Eli and my father shared no paternal DNA. 0. The system flagged it because Eli had connected his profile to our father's, which my father had apparently done years earlier at a family reunion as a novelty. The match came back, no paternal connection. Eli called my father. My father called the testing company. The company confirmed the results. My father ordered a clinical-grade paternity test through a lab. The results were the same. Eli was not his biological son. 11 years. 11 years after I sat in a living room and told my father the truth. 11 years after he called me a liar, signed the forms, and let them lock me in a facility. 11 years after my mother orchestrated my institutionalization to keep this exact secret buried. A $20 DNA kit did what I couldn't do at 15. It proved, with molecular certainty, what I'd known since I read those messages on our family computer. My father confronted my mother. I wasn't there, but I've been told what happened by my aunt, my father's sister, who was the only family member who ever expressed doubt about what was done to me. She said my father came home with the DNA results and put them on the kitchen table and didn't say a word. My mother looked at the paper. She looked at my father. And she said, "I can explain." My aunt said my father responded with a sentence that broke something in the room. He said, "You had our daughter committed to a psychiatric facility to cover this up." My mother said nothing. There was nothing to say. The architecture of the lie had finally collapsed, and she was standing in the rubble with nothing left to build with. My father filed for divorce within the month. At 61. After 33 years of marriage. The proceedings were apparently swift and brutal. My mother didn't contest much. She knew what the evidence looked like. She knew that the combination of the DNA results, my psychiatric records, and the timeline of events painted a picture so damning that no judge in the country would look at her with sympathy. My father got the house. My mother got a settlement that was significantly less than half. My aunt said the judge made a comment, off the record but within earshot, about unconscionable conduct. I don't know if that's true. But it sounds right. Glenn Hartley. Let me tell you about Glenn. He's still alive. Still in the same town. Still driving a truck, though probably not the same blue F-150. When the DNA results became family knowledge, someone, I don't know who, told Glenn. Glenn's response was to deny everything. Of course. He denied the affair. He denied paternity. He denied the messages. He denied knowing my mother beyond casual church acquaintance. He denied it right up until my father's divorce attorney subpoenaed a paternity test, and the court ordered Glenn to comply. The test confirmed what the consumer kit had already shown. Glenn was Eli's biological father. A man who sat in the same church as my family, who shook my father's hand on Sundays, who watched my father raise his son for over 2 decades without saying a word, was finally named. Not by me. By science. The same science I'd begged my family to pursue when I was 15. The same signs they refused to consider because considering it would have meant I was right. And I could not be right. Because if I was right, then everything they did to me was a crime. And it was. Eli and I spoke for the first time in over a decade about 2 months ago. He called me. I didn't recognize the number. When I heard his voice, I sat down on my kitchen floor because my legs stopped working. He said, "Callie." "It's Eli," I said. "I know," he said, "I just found out. About everything. About Glenn. About what Mom did. About what they did to you." His voice cracked on the last part. He said, "You were 15, I said. "Yeah," he said. "I'm so sorry," I said. "It wasn't your fault." "You were 11. You didn't know," he said. "I should have asked more questions," I said. "Eli, you were a child. Children believe what their parents tell them. That's not a failure. That's just being a kid," he cried. I cried. We sat on the phone for 45 minutes and rebuilt something that I thought was gone forever. Not the sibling relationship we had. That's dead. We're building a new one. Carefully. Slowly. Like two people constructing a bridge from opposite sides of a canyon, checking every plank before we put weight on it. Eli has not spoken to our mother since finding out. He told me he tried. He sat across from her and asked her, point blank, "Did you have Callie locked up because she knew about Glenn?" My mother said, "It was more complicated than that." Eli said, "It's a yes or no question, Mom," she said. "I was trying to protect the family." He said, "You were trying to protect yourself. And you sacrificed Callie to do it." She started crying. He left. He told me later that watching her cry didn't make him feel guilty. It made him feel sick. Because he realized that every tear she shed was for herself. Not for me. Not for the years I lost. Not for the medication I didn't need. Not for the diagnosis that was a lie. For herself. Because her secret was out and her family was gone and she was alone with the consequences of what she'd done. And then there was my father. The diner. 3 weeks ago. The DNA report on the table. The tears. The "I'm sorry." The begging. Let me tell you what it feels like to sit across from the man who was supposed to protect you and watch him beg for forgiveness that you cannot give. It doesn't feel powerful. It doesn't feel satisfying. It feels like standing in front of a house that burned down 10 years ago and having someone hand you a fire extinguisher. I looked at my father's face and I saw a man who was drowning in regret. A man who had finally, after 11 years, understood the full scope of what he'd done to his daughter. He'd signed the papers. He'd driven me to the facility. He'd stood in the intake room and watched me beg, and he'd called it for your own good. He'd believed my mother over his own child because believing her was easier than confronting the possibility that his wife was a liar and his son wasn't his. He chose comfort over me. He chose the lie over me. And now he wanted me to look at his tears and feel something soft. Something forgiving. Something that would let him sleep at night. I couldn't do it. Not because I'm cruel. Because forgiveness requires something that I don't have left for him. It requires the part of me that trusted adults to do the right thing. That part was killed in a facility in Pennsylvania when I was 15 years old, drugged into silence, told I was crazy, and left there for 4 months by the 2 people who were supposed to protect me from exactly that kind of harm. That part of me is gone. It's not injured. It's not dormant. It's dead. And you cannot ask a dead thing to do the work of the living. I said, "Rot." I meant it. Not as revenge. Not as cruelty. As fact. As the simple, honest acknowledgement that some things, once broken, stay broken. That some betrayals are so complete that the word sorry doesn't even begin to cover the cost. He put me in a psych ward. He let them put chemicals in my brain that changed the way I think, the way I sleep, the way I process emotions, permanently. He stole my adolescence. He stole my education. He stole my sense of safety in a world that should have been safe for a 15-year-old girl telling the truth. And he did it because his wife told him to. Because she was more persuasive than his own daughter. Because the lie was more comfortable than the truth. I live alone. I'm 26. I have a job I'm proud of. I have a brother who is learning to know me again. I have a therapist who tells me I'm the strongest person she's worked with, which I think is therapist code for the fact that you function at all is remarkable. I have a life that I built from nothing, from less than nothing, from a hole that my own parents dug and pushed me into and covered with dirt and walked away from. My mother calls sometimes. I don't answer. She sends letters. I don't open them. She told my aunt she did what she thought was best. Best. She had her daughter institutionalized, medicated, and diagnosed with a psychotic disorder to cover up an affair. That's what she calls best. I call it what it is, the act of a woman who loved her secret more than her child. And I will never, for as long as I breathe, let her rewrite that into something forgivable. My father sits in an empty house with a divorce decree and a DNA report and the knowledge that his daughter was right and he destroyed her for it. He has to live with that. I can't make it better. I can't make it smaller. I can't hand him absolution because absolution is not mine to give. It belongs to the 15-year-old girl who stood in an intake room holding a bag of clothes, begging her father to believe her, and watching him walk away. That girl doesn't forgive him. She doesn't forgive any of them. And she doesn't have to. People ask me what I want. What would make this right? What would give me peace? And the answer is, nothing. Nothing will make this right. Nothing will give me back the 4 months in that facility, the 6 years of medication fog, the lost education, the broken relationships, the trust that was ripped out of me at the root. Nothing will undo what was done. The only thing I have, the only thing that can't be taken from me, is this: I was right. At 15, alone, terrified, with nothing but a flash drive and the truth, I was right. And every person who called me crazy, who signed a form, who handed me a pill, who told me I was sick, every single one of them knows it now. I don't need their apology. I don't need their guilt. I don't need their tears. I need them to know that the girl they tried to erase is still here. Still standing. Still telling the truth. And this time, the whole world can hear her.